Okay, let's unpack this. If you are learning or mastering English, have you ever run into that wall where your grammar is impeccable, your vocabulary is strong, but when you speak, it doesn't quite land? It feels, I don't know, mechanical? Or, on the flip side, when you listen to native speakers, they sound like they're just skipping half the words.
It is, and I think this is fair to say, the single biggest blind spot in most language education.
Right.
Learners often have this feeling, this intuition, that they're missing some invisible internal rhythm. And the sources we've gathered today, they pinpoint exactly what that is, the underlying heartbeat of natural English speech.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We are going to get into the specific linguistic and phonetic mechanisms that create this rhythm. We're really going to pull back the curtain on things like stress timing reduction and flow.
Yeah, the real mechanics of it.
Yeah, exactly. And we're focusing entirely on the concepts you need to instantly sound more native, to clarify your own speech, and to dramatically boost your listening comprehension. This isn't about new vocabulary. It's about tuning your ear to the music the language is already playing.
Precisely. What the sources reveal is a really foundational truth. English is organized less by the distinct separation of individual words, which is how we often learn it,
One word after another.
and more by its musical structure. We're going to explore the concept that defines this structure, the thing that separates English from dozens of other languages: stress timing.
Okay.
And once you internalize this pattern, your brain, it stops processing a long list of individual sounds and it starts anticipating the structure of the message itself. It's a total game changer.
I love that idea. The music of language, it immediately reframes the whole conversation away from just grammar rules and into, well, pure sound dynamics.
It's really the only way to genuinely understand fluency in English. I mean, linguists who study phonetics, they know that every single language has a kind of rhythmic signature, a preferred tempo and structure. And this isn't abstract. It's a measurable pattern of sound duration and intensity.
And the analogies our sources provided are so useful for comparison here. Like, if you've spent time around a syllable-timed language like Spanish, for example, you get that feeling of like rapid-fire percussion.
That's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It really is. In a syllable-timed language, the duration between the start of one syllable and the next is relatively consistent.
Like a metronome.
Exactly like a metronome. Each syllable gets roughly equal weight and duration. It doesn't matter if it's a long, complex syllable or a short, simple one. It just ticks along steadily, like da-da-da-da.
Okay. And then you have French, which gets described more like, smooth jazz.
Yeah, that's a good one too. At highly melodic, you have all these sounds blurring and flowing together, the liaison, the nasal vowels. It creates this sense of continuous, almost uniform movement, but it's still relatively regular in its syllable delivery.
But English just breaks that mold completely.
Yeah, it shatters it. The sources compare English to an irregular pulsing heartbeat. You get these strong, clear beats followed by these quick, weak skips. So the rhythm is uneven, it's dynamic, and it's driven entirely by intensity, not by uniformity. And that contrast is where I think the majority of learner confusion comes from.
So let's get right into that defining feature then. Stress timing. If a language is stress timed, how does it actually physically organize itself around those strong beats? What's happening in the mouth?
Well, it dictates the timing of the entire utterance, the whole thing. English organizes its temporal structure around the stressed syllables.
The anchors.
Those stressed syllables act as anchors, exactly. And critically, they appear at relatively regular intervals of time. So if there are two stressed syllables in a sentence, the time gap between them should be fairly constant, whether or not there are two unstressed syllables in between or 6.
Wow. Okay, so the stressed syllables literally set the tempo, and everything else just has to scramble to adapt to fit that rhythm.
Precisely. This is the mechanism of compression and stretching.
And
if you have, say, 4 unstressed syllables sitting between 2 of those anchors, those 4 syllables have to be compressed and reduced drastically to fit into the same amount of time that maybe 2 syllables would take in a different part of the sentence.
The rhythm overrides the syllable count.
The rhythm is king. It completely overrides it.
I get the anchor concept, but why does the language force those unstressed syllables to compress? Why can't we just, take bigger steps rhythmically? What is the core pressure that's forcing that compression to happen?
It's pure linguistic efficiency. I mean, over hundreds of years, the English language has developed these systems, which we'll get into in the next section, that make it physically easier and faster to reduce non-essential words.
So it's about saving energy.
It's all about saving energy. If we didn't compress, the language would be inefficiently slow. Think of a simple phrase like, give me the book.
Yeah.
The stress is on give and book.
Okay.
Now think of a longer one. Give me the blue and red book. The time it takes to say both of those sentences is almost identical.
That's incredible.
It is. The unstressed words me, in that first example, take up some time, sure. But the 3 extra unstressed words me, the blue and red in the second example, are just severely crushed to maintain that temporal regularity set by the 2 anchors, give and book.
That walking analogy really helps solidify the difference then. A syllable-timed language is like marching left, right, left, right. Every step is uniform.
Yeah, sure, yes.
But in English, you're emphasizing steps at regular intervals. It's more like step, skip, skip, step, skip, skip, step.
Yeah.
The distance covered is regular, but the mechanics inside are just wildly irregular.
That's a fantastic way to put it. You're still moving forward, but with a different kind of gait.
Okay, so this brings us back to the classroom. If this stress timing is so fundamental, if it's the organizational principle of the whole language, why is it so often left out of standard language instruction? It seems like a huge oversight.
It is, and the sources call it the curriculum gap. The established way of teaching focuses so heavily on these atomized components, perfect pronunciation of isolated sounds, mastering complex grammar rules, acquiring vocabulary lists.
Right, building blocks.
Exactly, building blocks. This creates speakers who are excellent at the individual elements, but they completely fail to see how those elements are supposed to interact rhythmically in real time.
And the consequence of this isolated learning is, well, it's profound. If you, the learner, are taught to pronounce every syllable with careful, equal weight like that metronome we talked about, you are essentially imposing a syllable-timed rhythm onto a stress-timed language.
And that leads to 2 major problems. First, your speech just sounds unnatural. It sounds formal, sometimes halting, even if your grammar is 100% correct.
Okay. That's the production side.
Right. But second, and I think this is the bigger problem for actual communication, you are creating a massive comprehension challenge for the native speaker you're talking to.
Right, because the native speaker isn't listening for these discrete, equally weighted syllables. They're not. They are producing and, more importantly, anticipating a stream of highly compressed rhythmic sound. They are, as you said, playing the music.
And if a listener doesn't know the rhythm, they don't know which syllables are supposed to be compressed and which are supposed to stand out.
They're listening for the wrong thing.
They're listening for the wrong thing. They listen for clear articulation of every word, but they only hear the stressed anchors clearly. The compressed words, that me, the blue and red part, just becomes a confusing blur. So they try to decode isolated words, but they're hearing a continuous, blurred musical phrase, recognizing that rhythm is the absolute first step to decoding the meaning.
So we've established that rhythm is king, and that this rhythm demands compression. Now we need to move into the actual engineering of it all. How does English physically achieve that reduction? Which words are sort of eligible for compression, and what happens to their sounds?
The process is, it's actually very systematic. It's highly logical. It begins with what you could call the content, separating the essential meaning carriers from the grammatical operators.
The important stuff versus the glue.
The important stuff versus the glue. That's perfect. The foundational rule is the rule of importance. Native speakers, often completely unconsciously, stress the words that carry the main information. We call these content words, and they reduce the words that act as the grammatical framework, the function words.
And this is all driven by efficiency, right? The need to get the core message across as quickly as possible.
100%. So the content words, those are your anchors. They're the nouns, the main verbs, the adjectives, and the adverbs.
The meaty words.
The meaty words, yes. The function words are the grammatical glue. Articles like the and a, prepositions like to, of, at, auxiliary verbs have do, be conjunctions like and, but, and most pronouns like I, she, it.
They're grammatically vital. You can't have a sentence without them, but their actual meaning in isolation is minimal.
Exactly. They're built to be reduced. They're designed for it.
So let's go back to that example. I'm going to go to the store. If I read that like a robot with equal stress on everything, it takes forever, and it's just painful to listen to.
And you're stressing all 8 of those syllables. But a native speaker, they stress the core information. I'm going to go to the store. You hear the emphasis, the energy on the key verbs in the noun.
Right. Going. Go store.
The rest of it, I'm, to, ooh, and the are just crushed into the space between those anchors. Now, if you, as the learner, stress those function words, you're accidentally signaling that they carry some unique importance, which just confuses the listener.
It changes the entire meaning. If I say, I'm going to the store, I'm emphasizing the word to, which suggests, I don't know, maybe there was a debate about whether I was going from the store or near the store.
Right.
I've broken the default rhythm to communicate a very subtle and probably unnecessary contrast.
And that brings us to the actual sound reduction mechanism itself, which relies overwhelmingly on one tiny, unassuming vowel sound, the schwa, which is written as rum.
The schwa, the simple sound. It's really amazing that the most common sound in this huge global language is so often just completely overlooked in instruction.
It is the absolute embodiment of efficiency. The mechanism of reduction is this. When a syllable is unstressed, the vowel inside it doesn't try to articulate its full, complex sound. It relaxes its posture entirely.
What does that mean, relaxes its posture?
The mouth barely opens. The tongue remains central and neutral in the mouth. It requires the least possible effort from all the musculature in your jaw and tongue. It is the linguistic equivalent of taking your foot off the gas pedal. It's the default coasting sound.
It's the sound English defaults to when it needs to conserve energy.
Exactly. And we see this at the word level first. Just look at common multisyllable words where the stress doesn't fall on the first syllable. Take a word like banana.
Okay.
A non-native speaker might give equal weight to all three A sounds. N-A-ake.
Right, pronouncing the letter A as they learned it.
But a native speaker reduces the unstressed ones. The stress is on the middle syllable, B-N-A-N-A. The first and third syllables are reduced to schwa. They become these little throwaway sounds.
B-N-N-A-N, I can hear it now.
Or photograph. The stress is on the first syllable, P-H-otograph. That second O reduces to a schwa, photograph. If you try to give that middle O a full, clear O sound, you just sound overly formal or slightly incorrect.
And the ultimate application of this is on all those function words we mentioned.
That's where it does the most work. The article A in isolation is E, but in a sentence reduced, it's I saw a cat. The preposition for is strong foes, but reduced, it becomes for. This is for you. They all collapse into this universal neutral vowel sound. And this pattern, it's not optional. It's non-negotiable for achieving natural rhythm.
So the schwa is really the basis for what we call weak forms. We talked about how of becomes re or just Can we go a little deeper into the most frequent words that rely on these weak forms, especially the auxiliaries? Because I feel like that's where learners really miss the beat entirely.
Oh, that's a critical area for expansion. You're right. Function words, they only maintain their strong form when you say them in isolation, like reading from a list, or when you're emphasizing them for a specific reason. But the weak form is the absolute rule in continuous connected speech.
So let's look at those common auxiliary verbs, because using their full strong forms must completely disrupt the flow.
It does. Let's take the auxiliary have. In isolation, you say have. But when you use it in the present perfect, for instance, in a sentence like, they have finished the work, it reduces.
How does it reduce?
Well, often the H at the beginning is dropped entirely and the A vowel becomes a schwa. So it sounds like they finished the work. Sometimes it's just a contraction. They've finished.
Right.
If a learner says they have finished with that full, strong form, it sounds like they're trying to contrast it with they haven't finished. It puts all this undue emphasis on the auxiliary verb, which isn't the main point of the sentence.
That's a huge insight. So what about the auxiliary be forms like are and was? Those must be everywhere.
Everywhere. So are is stronged over, but in a question like where are you going, it reduces to sure.
Right.
Or just contrasts completely. Where are you going? The stress is on where and going, and that word are just becomes tiny.
It almost disappears.
It almost disappears. And it's the same with was. The strong form is was or W ins. But in a sentence like, what was he doing? The vowel in was reduces to a schwa. What really doing? Trying to maintain that full S sound in was just slows the entire phrase down, and it sounds really unnatural.
And the modals, these are already complex grammatically for a lot of people, so I imagine their rhythmic reduction adds a whole other layer of difficulty.
Absolutely. The modal verb can is the classic example here. The strong form is can, but when you're just using it for ability, like in I can go, it becomes the weak form, sorry, can. If you say can, a can go, it often implies that you're emphasizing permission. Yes, I can go, despite what you said. Learners really struggle with this because they feel that saying canan sounds like the word kin and that it's confusing, but it is the expected default sound in that context.
And the sources also mentioned the sort of ultimate examples of reduction, these phrases that have basically merged entirely because of this constant rhythmic pressure.
Yes, the cup of tea phenomenon. It's
Okay.
a perfect illustration. When the word of reduces to fray in the phrase cup of tea, the acoustic result is cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
The written form kupa that you see sometimes, that just reflects the spoken reduced reality. The same thing happens with going to becoming gonna or got to becoming gotta.
So these aren't just sloppy slang.
Not at all. They are legitimate linguistic structures that have evolved specifically to maintain the integrity of the stress-timed rhythm at a normal conversational speed. I mean, if you try to say, I am going to go now, using all the full forms, the rhythm would feel incredibly labored and slow.
So using weak forms isn't optional for fluency.
It's not optional. It is the core mechanism by which English maintains its natural pace.
Okay, we've now established how the sound of individual words compresses and stretches. But even with perfect schwas and weak forms, my speech could still sound choppy if I pause after every single word.
Exactly.
So how do native speakers knit all those reduced and stressed words together into a single, flowing whole?
This is where we need to shift our focus from the word to the phrase. English doesn't deliver ideas word by word. It delivers them in single rhythmic units. And these are called thought groups or sense groups. This is where fluency truly resides.
Thought groups.
A thought group is basically a unit of meaning. It could be a phrase or a clause that conveys a single logical idea. Native speakers, we think and we breathe in these groups, and they are delivered as one continuous, unbroken rhythmic unit.
And we know that each of these groups has its own rhythmic hierarchy. They can have multiple stresses, but usually there's one primary stress, right? The nuclear stress.
That's right, the nuclear stress. It's the loudest and usually the highest pitched, and it almost always falls on the last content word of that group.
So that final content word in the chunk is the real destination for the listener's attention.
It's the destination. It's the payload of that particular data packet.
Let's use that longer example from the source material. I went to the grocery store this morning to pick up some milk. How would a natural speaker actually chunk that sentence?
You'd typically break it down into units that reflect the grammatical and logical clauses of the sentence. So you'd have chunk 1, which is the action and location. I went to the grocery store. And it's interesting, grocery often retains the stress over store because it's the more specific defining detail.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have chunk 2, the time element, this morning.
A separate thought.
A separate thought group. And finally, chunk 3, the purpose, to pick up some milk.
So we have three main rhythmic anchors in that one sentence: grocery, morning, and milk. And everything else, all those little words like I went to this to pick up some, is reduced and compressed to serve those three peaks of information.
And the benefit of this is immense. It's about clarity and predictability. If a speaker uses unnatural pauses, like if they pause between went and to, they are fragmenting that thought group and completely destroying the rhythmic flow.
Right.
Speaking in these natural chunks with the correct nuclear stress placement makes the meaning instantly accessible because the rhythm is perfectly aligned with the message's structure.
Within those chunks, then, the sound has to be continuous. If you listen really closely to a native speaker, you often can't tell where one word ends and the next one begins. The pauses that we see in writing, the spaces between words, they're almost non-existent in speech.
That's the critical realization for so many learners. Words are not produced with separation, they are produced with linking, or what linguists call connected speech. This is absolutely essential for maintaining the momentum of stress timing.
The sources outline three key types of linking. Let's start with the most common and I think arguably the easiest one to master: consonant-vowel linking.
Right. This happens whenever a word ends in a consonant sound, and the very next word begins with a vowel sound. What happens acoustically is that the final consonant of the first word attaches itself to the beginning of the second word.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Take the phrase an apple. If you say that very slowly and carefully, you hear a pause. But in natural speech, it sounds like an apple.
An apple.
The N sound jumps over, or a longer one, turn it off. That becomes turn it off. The N from turn jumps to it, and the T from it jumps to off. It becomes one smooth word.
Which means if a learner is trying to enunciate turn, then pause off separately, they're actively inserting three little pauses and just destroying the rhythm.
They're fighting the language. Exactly. Then we have a slightly trickier one, vowel-vowel bridging. This is what happens when two vowels meet at a word boundary. The vocal mechanism will often insert a tiny little glide sound to smooth out the transition.
Like a little speed bump to keep the car rolling smoothly.
Precisely. It prevents a jarring stop. For example, between a word ending in a high front vowel sound, like the E and see it, a tiny I sound is often inserted. See it.
See it. Yeah, I can feel that.
And if the first word ends in a high back vowel, like the O sound in go away, a little he sound is inserted. Go away.
Go away.
This bridging maintains the continuous flow of sound energy. Without it, you get an uncomfortable glottal stop, a little catch in your throat, which halts the rhythm completely.
And finally, we have the merging of consonants, which seems to be mostly about efficiency when similar sounds meet up.
Yes, merging consonants. When two identical or very similar consonant sounds meet at a word boundary, they often just coalesce into one slightly longer sound, rather than being produced as two distinct sounds. A great example is hot tea.
Right.
It sounds like ho tea. You don't produce two separate T sounds. This blending, along with the CV linking and the bridging, ensures that within the thought group, the speech remains a continuous stream, organized by the rhythm, not by the silent gaps you see on the written page.
So if all of these reductions and linkages are happening at a moderate pace, what happens when native speech speeds up? You know, when the speaker is excited or just talking comfortably among friends.
This is where listening comprehension often completely collapses for the learner. It's the cliff edge. The moment speech speeds up, all of these reduction patterns become maximal.
Everything gets dialed up to 11.
Everything. Weak forms are fully utilized, consonants vanish, and contractions multiply like crazy.
The famous examples are really illustrative here. What are you going to do?
That rapidly reduces to what are y'all going to do?
Yeah.
Or sometimes even just, what is y'all going to do?
What you going to do?
Yeah, becomes the compressed, highly linked, schwa heavy, I don't know. The words are barely recognizable when you compare them to their dictionary forms.
I remember the first time I realized that a phrase like, did you eat yet, was compressing into something that sounded like jeet yet.
Gee shit.
That realization, it honestly felt like unlocking a cheat code for listening comprehension, because you finally stop trying to hear did and you start listening for the rhythmic chunk cheat.
That is the crucial pivot point. Because even when the words are maximally reduced, the rhythm remains the anchor. The underlying stress pattern holds the whole utterance together in what are you gonna do? The stress still falls on what and do, or perhaps on gonna.
The structure is still there.
The structure, the beat is constant, even if the melody is almost a mumble sometimes.
So learners struggle because they were taught these idealized dictionary forms of the words, but in real life, those words are compressed, linked, and rhythmically altered just to serve the beat.
Exactly. And if you can learn to decode the rhythm, you start to anticipate the sound. You know a short function word is supposed to be crushed, so you don't waste your mental energy trying to hear its full form. You listen for the anchors instead.
It's clear that rhythm provides the structure. It's the skeleton. But that structure also has to be pliable enough to convey complex meaning and emotion. So now we need to look at how speakers manipulate that default rhythm and the pitch to achieve all that nuance.
Right. So rhythm is both a fundamental rule and a communicative tool you can play with.
We know the default rhythm usually anchors on the last content word in a thought group. But how much flexibility do speakers really have to shift that anchor around?
They have massive flexibility.
Yeah.
The power of shifting the nuclear stress, that main point of emphasis, is huge in English. When you deviate from the default stress placement, you're signaling something new. Contrast, correction, surprise. The rhythm becomes the primary vehicle for that change in meaning.
Okay, let's use the classic example from the sources. I saw him yesterday. The default stress would fall on yesterday, right? Because it's the final content word.
Correct. That's just a neutral statement of fact, no special meaning.
But now let's observe the power of shifting that anchor. What happens if you stress the subject, I saw him yesterday?
Now you are explicitly contrasting yourself with someone else. The meaning is, I saw him, not my sister, not John. The focus is on the who.
Okay, and if I shift the stress to the main verb, I saw him yesterday.
Now you're contrasting the action itself. The meaning becomes, I saw him, I didn't just hear a rumor about him or talk to him on the phone. The focus is on the what.
And this is the really powerful one. If you stress the object pronoun, which is normally a reduced function word, the effect is dramatic. I saw him yesterday.
Yes. The meaning there is, I saw him, specifically, not the other person we were just discussing. The implication is crucial. Rhythm isn't just about making the language flow. It is the most efficient method English has for conveying these subtle shades of meaning and intention without changing a single written word.
This must be a huge struggle for learners who come from syllable-timed languages, where that kind of contrast or emphasis is often achieved by adding a separate word or a particle.
It is. In English, you just move the beat.
So if stress is the drum beat, the temporal anchor, then intonation is the melody. It's the pitch variation that rides on top of that beat.
And those two elements have to work in perfect synchronicity. They're inseparable.
Does the pitch change across all the syllables equally, or only on the stressed ones?
That's a critical point. The major pitch changes, the real melodic shifts, they happen on the stressed syllables, and particularly on that nuclear stress we talked about. The unstressed, reduced syllables, they tend to remain at a relatively flat, low pitch. They just kind of flow beneath the main melodic changes.
Let's look at the basic patterns then. Falling intonation signals completion.
Exactly. It signals certainty, finality, or a declarative statement. When you say, "I finished the report," the pitch falls dramatically on the word report, and that signals the end of the thought. It's done.
And conversely, rising intonation signals incompleteness or a question.
Yes. A sentence like, "You're leaving now." The rising pitch on the word now is what turns that statement into a simple yes-no question. And this pattern is also absolutely essential for signaling continuation in sequences or lists. Consider the sequence. I went to the store, bought some milk, came back home, and made dinner. The rising intonation on store and milk acts like an acoustic comma.
It tells the listener, wait, there's more coming.
Precisely. The final fall on home or dinner signals the completion of the entire narrative unit. If the speaker used a falling intonation on store, the listener would assume the story was over at that point and might even interrupt.
We've been discussing a sort of default rhythm, but English clearly speeds up and slows down depending on the context. How dynamic is this stress timing, really?
It's highly dynamic, but the core principle of stress timing is a constant. The degree of reduction and the tempo of the speech can change, but the placement of the anchors doesn't fundamentally shift.
So it adapts.
It adapts. Look at the difference between formal speech, say, a presidential address, or a high-stakes professional pitch and casual conversation.
Very different sounds.
Very different. Formal speech tends to be slower, the articulation is much clearer, and there's less of that maximal reduction we discussed. Weak forms are still used, but the difference in energy between the stressed and unstressed syllables might be less extreme.
Yeah.
The speaker is prioritizing maximum clarity over maximum speed.
Whereas in casual conversation, especially when the energy is high, you get the opposite.
You get maximum reduction, maximal linking, and full utilization of all the weak forms. If you're excited about telling a story, you speak faster, and the language accommodates that speed by reducing everything that isn't absolutely essential to the core meaning.
Emotion must play a huge role, too.
A powerful role. Excitement increases the tempo and often increases the energy difference between the strong and weak syllables. If a speaker is speaking sadly or carefully, the rhythm slows down, and the individual word boundaries might become slightly clearer, which sort of mimics formal speech.
And our sources confirm that this basic rhythmic pattern is universal across the major English varieties. It's not just an American or British thing.
No, the principle of stress timing holds across British, American, Australian, and all major native English dialects. The implementation can vary slightly.
How so?
Well, for instance, British English is often noted for having a more exaggerated or clipped rhythmic pattern. The stressed syllables can be very loud and long, and the unstressed ones are almost swallowed entirely. American English often exhibits a slightly smoother blend between the two. But in all cases, the primary organization is still based on the regular occurrence of those stressed anchors. The heartbeat is the same, even if the intensity varies.
Okay, so we have the theory, the mechanics, and the application to meaning. Now we really need to turn to the listener. Why should you internalize this beat? What is the practical payoff for an advanced learner in a real-world communication setting?
The payoff is twofold, and it's massive. It's about efficiency in your production and prediction in your comprehension.
Let's start with efficiency.
Rhythm is the ultimate efficiency hack for communication. By automatically stressing the content words and reducing the function words, English speech provides an immediate acoustic hierarchy of information.
It flags what's important.
Instantly. The listener doesn't have to guess. They know the critical information is concentrated on those high-energy syllables.
So when a speaker, especially a non-native speaker, fails to follow this rhythm by, say, stressing a function word or giving equal weight to every single syllable, they are actively disrupting that efficiency.
They are forcing the listener to work harder, much harder. They force the listener to slow down their own decoding process to try and parse the unusual pattern. When a native listener hears incorrect stress, their brain briefly stalls. It's trying to figure out, why do they emphasize the instead of store?
Right. What special meaning am I missing?
Exactly. By conforming to the expected stress time rhythm, you dramatically reduce the cognitive load on your listener, and that allows them to focus entirely on your message, not on the mechanics of your delivery.
It's the difference between driving on a clear, well-marked highway and driving through a chaotic construction zone. One requires all your mental effort just to navigate the path. The other allows you to relax and enjoy the scenery.
That's a perfect analogy. And beyond mere efficiency, the sources highlighted a really fascinating cognitive benefit that comes from internalizing this rhythm. Predictive ability. This is truly the key to mastering fast, real-world conversation.
What exactly is happening in the brain when we predict based on rhythm? How does that work?
Well, your brain, once it's tuned to stress timing, it begins to anticipate the flow. It knows that the distance in time between the strong beats is relatively constant.
Okay.
This allows the listener to anticipate when the next anchor, the next piece of critical information, is going to arrive. It helps you predict where a thought group is ending, which in turn helps you predict grammatical function. Falling intonation probably means a statement. Rising intonation, probably a question.
So you stop listening for every single word. You can't. It's too fast.
You can.
Instead, you start to focus on the rhythmic guideposts, the stressed syllables, and you use context and expectation to quickly fill in the compressed, reduced words that fall in between.
That is exactly it. You are actively predicting the structure and the information density of the sentence. And this massive reduction in mental effort, it frees up all these cognitive resources that would otherwise be spent agonizing over an unclear schwa sound or a missed word.
You move from passively trying to catch the sound to actively anticipating the meaning.
And the impact that has on your listening comprehension is often the most dramatic benefit of mastering the beat. It's huge.
For the serious learner who's listening right now and wants to implement this, what are the, say, 4 most common rhythmic pitfalls they need to be hyper aware of?
Okay, let's break them down. We'll start with the most disruptive one. Stressing function words. You should almost never place the nuclear stress on articles, prepositions, or auxiliary verbs unless you are explicitly creating a contrast. Saying, "I can do it" is the correct neutral statement, but saying, "I can do it" signals an unnecessary correction or emphasis.
Got it. Okay, number 2.
Number 2 is the schwa issue. Failing to reduce vowels. If you pronounce every vowel with its full, clear dictionary quality, your speech will sound overly careful, stiff, and aggressively slow. It completely defeats the purpose of efficiency. You have to remember, the schwa is the default setting for any unstressed syllable.
And number 3.
Number 3 is the flow problem. Pausing between every word. This is where that linking mastery comes in. English words within a single thought group must flow continuously. If you stop and restart the rhythmic unit with every single word, you lose the musicality entirely. It sounds like a computer reading a list.
And the final big pitfall.
Inconsistent stress. If you just randomly emphasize syllables or you fail to maintain that pattern of strong, weak, weak, strong, your speech becomes chaotic and unpredictable for the listener. Native rhythm is extremely consistent, which is precisely why it's so predictable and so efficient.
Okay, so the good news is that rhythm is something your body and your brain are literally wired to learn. It just requires some specific training targeted at auditory perception and muscle memory.
That's right. And the first and most foundational step is simply awareness.
Now that you know about stress timing, the schwa, and weak forms, you need to become an active listener. When you watch a movie or listen to native speech, don't focus on the grammar for a bit. Close your eyes and just focus on the sound. Start tapping your finger along to the stressed syllables. Listen for the pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Don't listen to the word. Listen to the energy.
Once you're aware of it, the next step is physical practice using rhythmic reading. This is one of the most effective techniques out there. You take a simple text, maybe just a few paragraphs from an article. First, go through and mark every single content word that you think should receive stress. The nouns, main verbs, adjectives.
Then you read it aloud, but you exaggerate the pattern aggressively. You should be loud and long on the stressed words and practically whisper or throw away all the unstressed function words. So if the line is, "The dog was chasing the ball into the park," you should sound like a choppy, dramatic actor.
It feels silly at first.
It does. But that exaggeration, it trains the muscle memory of your mouth and your ear to accept the huge disparity in energy between the strong and weak syllables.
Another superb technique is to use a metronome or background music. Set a steady beat, say 120 beats per minute. Try to speak sentences or phrases and force every single stressed syllable to land exactly on that click or beat. All the reduced syllables have to be crammed into the tiny space between the clicks. This physically reinforces the temporal regularity of the strong beats.
And my personal favorite for real-time internalization is shadowing. This technique isn't just listening and then repeating later. You listen to a native speaker segment, maybe just 5 seconds of it, and you repeat it immediately, talking over or just a split second behind the speaker.
And the key is,
You aren't trying to capture the dictionary words, you're trying to perfectly mimic the music, the rhythm, the intonation, and the tempo.
shadowing works because it bypasses your mental dictionary. It forces your auditory system and your articulatory muscles to work together purely based on sound pattern recognition. It's training the muscle memory you need for smooth linking and reduction.
And don't dismiss singing. I mean, English songs, especially pop and rock, they follow rhythmic patterns that are very similar to speech. If you sing along, you naturally internalize the rhythm and the flow of connected speech without even consciously thinking about the linguistic rules. It makes the beat physical and, well, enjoyable.
And finally, for more subtle refinement, you can practice minimal stress pairs. Take simple identical sentences and just practice hearing and producing the difference based only on where the stress is located. Continuously practice saying, I saw him yesterday versus I saw him yesterday. This trains your ear to the meaning-altering power of stress location, which is essential for advanced nuance.
This has been absolutely illuminating. To summarize for everyone, the path to natural fluency, it runs directly through the language's fundamental architecture. English is stress-timed. The schwa and weak forms are the essential engines of that reduction. You have to speak in flowing, linked thought groups, not discrete words. And ultimately, mastering this rhythm drastically reduces the cognitive burden for both you and your listener.
And we really want to leave you with a sense of empowerment here. For many learners, adopting a native-like rhythm can feel like you're letting go of control or even changing your identity. But understanding this system, it actually grants you control.
That's a great point.
You now have the choice, the ability to utilize these reduction and timing patterns for maximum clarity and naturalness in any professional or social setting you choose.
Ultimately, you are moving past simply knowing the language and you're learning how to perform it. Learning the rhythm is like learning the basic steps of a dance. It provides the necessary structure and framework, but it also allows you the freedom to vary the tempo, to inject your own personality, and to just enjoy the conversation without constantly fighting the fundamental physics of the language.
And the sources pointed out this intimate, necessary relationship between English grammar and this process of reduction. That grammatical function words must be able to slide easily into those unstressed spaces. So let's close with this provocative thought. Contractions like should have becoming should have, or going to becoming gonna. These are essentially the language finding grammatical shortcuts just to keep the beat.
The rhythm forces the grammar to change.
Exactly. So if rhythm fundamentally dictates structure, consider this. What other complex aspects of English grammar that you might have found confusing? Maybe the strange positions of prepositions or the quick, fluid usage of phrasal verbs were actually developed, or at least reinforced, just to satisfy the relentless necessity of the stress-timed beat. Something to mull on as you start listening for that hidden heartbeat in every conversation you encounter.